When we think about the days we're living in, it seems that the world is in a little chaos. It seems like things are out of control. There are times we go to the grocery store and we wonder what happened. There are times when we watch TV or the news, we wonder what's going on. There are times when we think about what's going on in the Middle East, in Russia or China or other parts of the world. We just wonder what in the world is going to happen. I have a coworker in my hospice work that shared with me that her son, who was in the Navy, is there now. He is in the Middle East as we speak right now on his ship. She wanted prayer for him and everyone else that's on his boat. And because there's a lot of unrest, there's a lot of uncertainty about what's going on in Israel and the Middle East and even in our own country. I read this morning that Israel sent some jets into southern Lebanon to take out some Hezbollah targets. We've all heard the news, haven't we? And we all have said things like this: the end is near. Well, guess what? The end has always been near. So as we think about in God we trust, and when we think about is the end near, and what will happen to the nation of Israel, that's what we're going to look at this morning, and we're going to look at it from Matthew 24. As we think about the nation of Israel, I want you to leave this morning with this thought: God is in control. God has always been in control. And my future, if I am a follower of Jesus, my future is secure. That's what I want you to leave with this morning. Now, whether or not this is the end, I don't know if we are in the end, but what I do know is the end is nearer than it ever has been. So we're going to look at it this morning. So today, as we go through these scriptures in Matthew 24 and look at some others in just a little bit, I want you to think about this. And here's the thought: God's plan is perfect. And God is on His throne, and He is orchestrating, as He always has been, His perfect will in this world in which we live. And secondly, there are forces that we cannot see. We cannot visibly see the forces in operation behind us, because they are the spiritual realm, or that is the spiritual realm of God and His angels and Satan and his demons working in this world to do their business. And they influence people just like me and you. And in the end, at the end of the day, all we can do is trust God. We trust God that He's guided as He always has. So without further ado, let's think about Matthew 24. Jesus and His disciples, the 12 followers of Christ, they had gone to the temple on this particular day. And as they were leaving, Jesus turned to them and said, "This temple is going to be destroyed." And He said, the rocks upon which the temple is built, the temple itself, all of them will become nothing but rubble. Some of us have had the privilege of going to Israel. We've gone to the Temple Mount. And I remember the first time that I went. And at least every time I went, we left from what would have been the Dead Sea area, making our way up the hill. And as you crested that hill, you could see where the temple used to stand, where the Dome of the Rock now sits. And you could see the remnants of that wall, that eastern wall that still stands to this day. And it is a spectacular sight as we see that. Can you imagine how his disciples felt? And even those religious leaders in the day, because they heard what Jesus said, that the temple would be destroyed, they thought that'll never happen. They considered it blasphemous in a way. And yet it did in AD 70. So when Jesus had said these words and they made their way down the little mountain, down the hill, up into the Mount of Olives, this is where I want us to start reading. Verse number 3 of Matthew 24. While he was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples approached him privately and said, "Tell us, when will these things happen? And what is the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?" Jesus replied to them, and I want you to hear this verse very carefully. "Watch out that no one deceives you. For many will come in my name, saying, 'I am the Messiah,' and they will deceive many. You are going to hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not alarmed, because these things must take place, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise up against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these events are the beginning of labor pains." Now, he's not talking about birth labor pains, but the pains of what is to come. So let's dive into these verses for just a minute. In 70 AD, I just mentioned the temple was destroyed. There was a riot in Jerusalem, and the emperor of the day had had enough of what was going on in the land of Israel. And so he ordered his general to basically take the city, and as they were taking the city, the people were rebellious, fighting against the great and massive Roman Empire. And the general then basically said this: "Here's how we're going to defeat this nation. Let's take the temple and let's knock it down and let's burn it." Because he understood their faith, and he knew that if they were able to do that, the hearts of the people would melt. And that's exactly what happened. And the people fled the city. And after the city was fully taken, Rome issued this decree: if you were Jewish, you were no longer welcome here. They were dispersed from the city of Jerusalem and from the land of Israel all over the known world of the day. And it stayed that way. It stayed that way until after World War II, when the Jews were given their homeland back. Now, with that said, Jesus said these words that I just read. They wanted to know, when's the end coming? And Jesus said later, I don't even know the time. God knows when things will come to their end. He knows the time because He is the one who sits upon the throne. And Jesus said, I don't know the time, but I can give you some signs and point you to a hope. And so He said, I want you to understand first and foremost, don't be deceived by anybody out there. There are a lot of opinions. There are a lot of thoughts, and there are a lot of ideas about the end. There are concerns, and people have said, related to what's going on, not just in our country, but in our world, and especially with what's going on in the Middle East even today, that the end is imminent. Well, it's not imminent, but it's a lot closer than it is or was. And so He said, don't be deceived, because there will be people after I have ascended to heaven who will claim to be the Messiah. And there will be people who will follow that individual. And notice what Jesus said, many false messiahs will come. And throughout history, we have seen many false messiahs come and go. But Jesus emphasized in these verses I just read, don't worry about that. We worry a lot, don't we? We worry a lot. We fret about a lot. We get upset and uptight about a lot. I am in that boat occasionally. There are moments in my life when I get a little anxious and when I get a little frustrated. Even I, who knows a lot of Scripture, sometimes I fret. We've got to learn to trust God when we get weary, when we begin to wonder, when we begin to doubt, when we begin to have all of those questions that seemingly are unanswerable. We've got to learn to say, God, I am going to trust you now and forever. Just a little history. Most of you know I don't really love history. I like history. My wife loves history. I mean, loves history. She taught history in public schools for many years. She loves history, especially American history. But history is important. It teaches and reminds us of what has happened and helps us understand what is happening and even is a predictor of what is probably going to happen. And so history is important. When we think about Israel in conflict, see, right now, when we hear about our Navy in the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Suez, when we hear Hezbollah, Hamas, when we hear the leaders of Iran and other countries say Israel must be wiped off the face of the earth, when we see rockets shot into the nation of Israel, when we hear all of these rumors, we begin to go, this could be it. When we kind of go back and look at history, it seems like, because it is true, it doesn't just seem like it is actual reality. Throughout Israel's history, there has been conflict. When Abraham was called to build the nation of Israel and he settled in Egypt, many of us just read through the book of Exodus. What did Israel face through the nation of Egypt? Problem after problem after problem after problem. And then when they made it to the land that God had promised them, they faced all kinds of conflict from the people living there, the Amorites, the Philistines, the Pezerites, and I can't remember all those ites, okay? But there are a lot of those people in the land who were in conflict with Israel for hundreds of years. And then later it became the Assyrians, and then the Babylonians, and then the Persians, and then the Romans. All of that is historical conflict. Mighty, powerful nations. I mean, mighty and powerful nations in conflict with this little bitty parcel of land in the Middle East. We move into more modern history, and we move to Adolf Hitler. His hatred for the Jews was so powerful, he murdered millions of Jewish people. After World War II ended, the United Nations gathered, and in 1945-47, Israel was given its homeland back again. Think of the significance of that. They became a nation once again on the land that God had promised them. See, God, for almost 2,000 years, moved to that purpose. And then, not long after they became a nation, a very young nation at that, there was this event called the 6-Day War. 6 days, literally 6 days. Syria, Lebanon, Egypt, Jordan, all the countries surrounding Israel said, we're going to just take them out. And in 6 days, Israel, this young tiny nation, defeated all of those other powerful nations. Coincidence? No. It's the hand of God. Why in the world do we worry about the future? Today, Israel's fighting against Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Iran, and countless others. Here's what I want us to see. The reason all of this has happened and the reason this is happening is because God made a covenant with Abraham to establish a nation to be called Israel. And from the nation of Israel, a Messiah would be born so that the world could be saved from their sins. And through the ages, see, as we go back and look, there are periods of time that God moves significantly. When Jesus came and lived on this earth and died on the cross for our sins, was buried and raised from the dead, when He defeated death and the grave and paid the price for our sin, the age of the church began. And right now we're in a dispensation called the age of the church. It is our responsibility as Christians, as followers of Christ, to share this good news. But God has not forgotten His promise and covenant that He made with Israel and Abraham so many hundreds of years ago. And the day is coming when the church's age will come to its end. And the nation of Israel will be the primary focus once again. Satan knows all this. He understands all of this. Every demon of hell knows and understands this. And that is why through the ages, spiritual warfare has raged. And guess who they waged it against? People. There was a time, and it was kind of funny, Ron and I were talking, I don't remember what we were talking about, but the topic was basically this: spiritual warfare in marriage, in families, in life. And the devil can influence someone just like me to say or do something I should not do. He can also influence my wife, my children, and every single one of us. You may say, well, I don't really think the devil's got that big a grip on me. You better watch out. Even when Jesus was on this earth, at least 2 occasions, Jesus looked at Peter, who was to become the rock of the church. He said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan." Was Peter Satan? No, but he was being influenced by Satan. You see, in this evolving and unfolding history that's leading us to the end where Satan is ultimately defeated, Satan and every demon of hell is influencing people just like me and you. Government leaders. That includes people in our own country, in our own local governments, and every level of government in between, because Satan wants to prevent God's plan from being fulfilled. He wants to make it happen His way. So, that's why all these nations have been fighting against Israel through all of these years. Well, here's what I want us to see from this story. As we think about the question, is this the end? The first one is this, and I said it a couple of weeks ago. It is simply this: God is still fulfilling His purpose. God is still following the plan. He is still moving us towards His plan. Jeremiah 37 says it this way: how awful that day will be There will be no other like it. It will be a time of trouble for Jacob, but he will be saved out of it. When it comes to the end, meaning when the end truly comes to its final end, this specific reference refers to something called the time of Jacob's trouble. In every Old Testament and even New Testament books included, everything's pointing to the end. God's final rule and reign over everything, where Satan and the demons of hell are bound for all of eternity, where sin will no longer exist. And this specific reference in the book of Jeremiah is a prophetic statement that talks about a future event that is yet to occur, the tribulation. You probably have heard about the Great Tribulation, a 7-year span of time where some very interesting things are going to unfold and happen. And this verse that I just showed you, Jeremiah 37, talks about this time. I want you to hear this, because there are a lot of different views, but this is a view that I've been studying this and restudying it and studying it, and here's the thing. Before we get there, God's going to take His followers out of this world. That means saved, bona fide saved people will be raptured before this time happens. Now, there's going to be some folks left behind, and they're going to scratch their heads and wonder where all them folks go. We're not going to worry about that, are we? Because here's the thing, you need to make sure that when that time comes, you're in the raptured group. You don't want to be left behind. See, we have in our own country the philosophy and the idea, one, that there are many gods who all point us to a place called heaven. That is a lie. It is not scriptural. And there is this other idea floating in our country today that God loves so much, He would never send anyone to a place called hell. That is a lie as well. We hear so much about God is love and God doesn't judge, but when you look at the whole of Scripture, Old and New Testament alike, the day is coming when Jesus returns. It's not going to be just all love. It's going to be a sad day for those who do not know Him. And when the church is raptured, that is the moment at which the nation of Israel's role will be restored as the people representing who God is. And when Jeremiah was given this vision, and when he wrote these words, it was a prophetic statement for future Israelites to understand that the day is coming, a day of trouble for you. Because here's the thing, when I've been to Israel 3 times, there are a few followers of Jesus in Israel, and I mean a few. Most Jewish people today understand, depending on their religious meaning, the most liberal, they don't understand none of this, or very little of it. But most Jewish people today are far from God. And what this verse is referring to of Israel, it's going to get real bad for you. Well, God is basically saying this time of tribulation on the Jewish nation is to bring them to their knees, to say, Jesus is the only way. Jesus is the only way that I can be made right with God. And so God is going to bring this tribulation upon the Jewish nation and the rest of the world to see that He is the only way. Now, I need to say when we ask the question, is the end near? The end. Before all of the end, or before the end can actually happen, there's something significant that also needs to happen. And it has to do with the temple itself. Again, if you went to Israel today and you drive over to the top of the Mount of Olives, and when you look across the valley, you will see the Dome of the Rock. One day, a third temple will be rebuilt, either there or real close to there. That is a significant thing. Later in this chapter, we read in Matthew 24, verse 15, these words. Jesus is speaking. He says, "So when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place," and then in parentheses, "let the reader understand." This is what Jesus was saying. He just said earlier in Matthew 24, the temple's going to be destroyed. And then just a few verses later, he says, the day will come when in the temple, there will be a desolation, a desecration of the temple. Just in a very quick nutshell, this is what Jesus was saying. This temple's going to be destroyed, and sometime in the future, a new temple will be built. The false prophet, the beast, I'm just going to call him a really bad guy, will rise up. And the world is going to fall in love with this leader, this charismatic leader who is going to promise all of these just wonderful things, and everybody's going to get behind this guy. He's going to make a deal even with Israel and say, I will guarantee that you will be safe. And 3 years after he makes the deal, 3.5 years, he's going to break his promise. He will declare himself to be God. He will go into the temple, the newly built temple, and he will desecrate it. And then that's when things are going to get real bad. And at the end of that 7-year period, we have some great things happening then. And again, we're going to be in heaven with Jesus at this point. Those of us who are followers of Christ. By the way, in September the 15th of 2022, some of you know what happened on that day. But on that day, a cattle farmer out in Texas, had 5 red heifers that had been born into his flock. His herd, I'm sorry. I called a flock of cows a flock. A herd of cattle, these 5 red heifers were born. You may think, what's important about a red heifer? In the book of Numbers, for the temple, you had to have the ashes of a red heifer to cleanse and purify. Those 5 heifers were shipped to Israel. They're somewhere there now. Why is that important? Read into it what you want. But the temple and its rebuilding is apparently closer than ever. Now, whether it happens in our lifetime is irrelevant, but I just want you to understand the temple will be rebuilt. And the final thing is this. When the Antichrist comes, that evil guy I just mentioned, when he comes, there will be supposedly peace. But he's going to break that deal. Things are going to get pretty bad. And once that happens, the entire world will usher its entire energy upon the little nation of Israel with this idea: we are going to destroy them completely. This is what we read in Revelation 19:11. Then I saw heaven opened, and a white horse was standing there. Its rider was named Faithful and True, for he judges fairly and wages a righteous war. See, in Revelation 19, we are nearing the end of the end. This is at the very end of the time of the tribulation. And when the time comes, John in the vision said, I saw heaven open, and Jesus on his white horse rode out of heaven along with his angels. And when he came to the area of what we call Armageddon, as the nations are about to wage war on all of Israel, all he does is speak, and they're all killed, except two, the devil himself and the Antichrist. This is all in Revelation 19, and they are cast alive into hell itself. And then later in Revelation, we read of the great judgment, where all of the wicked of the world are judged for all of their sins. And only those whose names are written in the Lamb's Book of Life, those who said, Jesus, you came and lived a sinless life. You gave your life on a cross for my sin. You were buried dead and raised from the dead, and I put my hope and trust in you, and I lived for you and honored you the best I could. And when we have made that profession of faith, we have our names written in the Lamb's Book of Life, and we will live forever in heaven. But everyone whose name is not written in the Lamb's Book of Life will be thrown into hell for all of eternity. And that's the end. We're not there yet. I mean, it looks a little bleak, doesn't it? But you know what? There's hope. Because the hope is we know how the story ends. We know what's going to happen. We just don't know when it's going to happen. So when you turn on the news later today and you see what might be the beginning of World War III, maybe it is. Maybe it's not. I'm telling you, don't worry about it. Don't fret it. Because the time will come, if this is the end, the time is coming when the Lord's trumpet will blare and He will call us and we'll meet Him in the air. Maybe we should have sang I'll Fly Away. I don't know. But here's the point. I don't want you to go through this life worrying about anything you might go through. You might go through a lot. Our country may get a lot worse than it is now. We may experience some persecution here, and even in our own country. But you know what? God's still winning. He hasn't lost the battle. He's not going to lose the war. And so we simply say, God, I trust you and I will follow you no matter what. I'm following you. You've got me in the palm of your hand, and you're not letting go of me. In God I trust. And I pray that we are able to say collectively, in God we trust. And I will serve Him until the day I breathe my last, or the day He calls me home, and I'm with Him forever in heaven.